So welcome to my beginner tutorial of 3ds Max. In this we will learn how to use it and navigate it. So the first time you launch 3ds Max it looks something like this. As you can see you have 4 viewports. To choose a viewport, basically what a viewport is, it allows you to see your models from a specific angle from which you want to work. As you can see here, this is the front viewport. If I left click I could select that. This is the top, this is the left, and this is the perspective. The perspective viewport is just like you could see it according to your own perspective from any angle. We have many more. For example, orthographic. In orthographic, you could actually see something really large like this. As you can see, this viewport is covering up a lot of area. You could just see if you have like this huge level design or anything. Anyways, I'm just going to reset it back to normal and show you. So if you basically left click or tap with the middle mouse button, you can switch between your viewports. To pan around into a viewport, you can use your middle mouse button to move it around. This is the left viewport now. I'm going to switch it back to front. You can do it by pressing F or choosing one of these. As you can see, we have perspective, orthographic, top, bottom, left, right. To toggle any viewport to full screen, hold down Alt on your keyboard and press W. It's going to toggle your viewport to a full screen. And if you press Alt W again, it switches. Similarly, if I want to work with the left viewport, I'm going to click it, press Alt plus W. Now, if any of you don't really have a mouse or are working with the laptop's touchpad or something, you guys can just come here all the way, and here's the key of maximize viewport toggle. The shortcut key is Alt W. You can press this too. So, and to pan around, you have to hold your middle mouse button, and alternatively, you can click this hand symbol and use your left mouse button to just pan around in that viewport. Any viewport works, like the front, top, or any of these 4. And even if you toggle the viewport to full screen, you can still pan it around. You can use the middle mouse button as shortcut to pan around too, but as long as this blue symbol is highlighted around it, around the panning symbol, to disable it, meaning you can't select anything or click even if you do. To do that, just press the right mouse button and it will be deselected, as you can see here. Now, how do you rotate around your viewport? Basically, to rotate around, you just have to hold down Alt and use the middle mouse button to rotate. And alternatively, you can also use the orbit. I will cover that up in a bit, but you basically just spin around the center of an object. You guys would be wondering this little symbol on top of here. Basically, any viewport, for example, we have the perspective viewport. If you come over here, you will see this little home icon. If you press the home icon, it resets that viewport because when you launch 3ds Max, this is basically the viewport you're actually looking at. This is what you have, and most of you won't have this here on the side if you don't have V-Ray installed. I'm using a bit of an older version of 3ds Max for this, but these same techniques works on the latest 2022 or 2023 version as well, or any beyond 3ds Max 2016. Like they're all the same techniques, so there would be a bit of changes. For example, like the viewport, it now lets you adjust them. You can adjust them here too. I will cover that up in the next tutorial. Anyways, back to our tutorial. So I was telling you about this symbol here. If you hold your left click here, you guys would be able to see it says front. You guys can choose top. One more thing, it lets you see it in perspective viewport, but if you have a hard-coded fixed viewport like the left, it's going to show you the left exactly like a flat 2D paper sheet, like a 2D mode. Perfect. This one, it still is not perfect. One more thing, if you hover over here, you will see these 2 arrows. Most tutorials don't cover this arrow for some reason, I don't know why. So if you have this front viewport and you click this, you can actually rotate it on any angle. You can just rotate your viewport around like this. Now, you guys know how to rotate and pan around and all of that. And to zoom in and out, you can use your middle mouse button to zoom in and zoom out. And alternatively, if you look here, we have the zoom button. If you choose it, just hold the left click and move your cursor down to zoom out, and move your cursor up to zoom in. Again, by hitting the right click, you can deselect that. So now we have covered up this much. Similarly, if you switch to a different viewport, they also provide you the ability to use these arrows to rotate around. But once you rotate, it will remain this way. But sometimes it shows you that you have switched to orthographic, so don't worry about it. You just need to hold the middle mouse button and pan around a little bit or just tap it. And it would be all set. For example, I'm just rotating it. You can see it switched to orthographic, but if I just tap with the middle mouse button and move around a little or just reset it back to normal, it's just going to switch back to the top viewport. One more thing, in any of these viewports, if you're working, like for example, let's say I'm working here, I can only pan around. If I try to rotate it, it switches it to orthographic mode like this. Orthographic mode allows you to see a bigger grid compared to, well, the perspective viewport. So to switch it back, most of these have a shortcut key, as you can see, P for perspective, U for orthographic, T for top, and all, but you can just choose your favorite two. For example, I want to work with the bottom. I will choose the bottom viewport here. The top is here, and instead of the left, I need to see the right side. I can just come here and choose the right, like that, or the back side, or any of these. Alternatively, we can just rotate any of these, choose these viewport like this, and there, it would be like that. It would be selected all except the perspective, because if you choose this, it won't change. So if they're already in wireframe mode, which is, I will cover what a wireframe is in a bit. Another thing, you're seeing it now, we will actually, since you're familiar with how to navigate around and stuff, I'll actually show you how to work in 3ds Max. So as you guys can see it here, we are seeing this grid. We could create our own custom grid too, but to make the grid disappear, press G. The grid goes away. If we press G again, the grid reappears. It goes the same for these. Pressing G makes the grid appear and disappear. Well, by default it appears, but if you press G, it just hides it temporarily. This is how you do it. Anyways, now I'm going to explain to you how we can actually work in 3ds Max. First of all, I'm going to pick up a box. As you can see, it lets us choose a name for it and a color. So by default, each time we draw a box, I'm just going to hold the left click and drag it out. And when I let go of the left click, it's going to put me in the second mode, which is I can determine the height. Basically, when we drag, we're deciding the height and width. So wherever I stop and tap the left click again, it's going to draw it, like right here. But if I drag it again, like this, and I'm working with it and I accidentally dragged and draw it, I'm just going to hit the right click. It's going to go. Now you see, let's say I want to select this box. You see, it's still highlighted blue. Some people make this mistake. I'm going to try to select it by clicking it, but they end up drawing this. So make sure this blue box is unhighlighted. You can click on it again, like I'm going to hit right click. If I hit right click again, it's going to become deselected. Same goes for all these shapes. And alternatively, you can disable it by clicking it on it again. Sometimes it doesn't work. I don't know if they fixed it in the newer versions, but you can just hit right click to deselect it. Now another thing, as you people can see, it says auto grid. What auto grid does, it automatically aligns it to this grid. Like anywhere you just draw it out, it's going to auto grid it. We will cover that up more in the snappings tutorial, where I will show you these snap toggles and all of that. But before any of it, we are going to cover up more primitives. We get these creation method. If I choose a cube and I drag this out, it's going to draw a perfect cube in all four angles like this. And another thing we can do is customly now rearrange it. For example, with this selected, we could just move it around or scale it. And, and alternatively, if you just are satisfied with your shape, you can just go here. This is called the modifying panel. This is where you actually sculpt and apply modifiers to something to make it into a shape. So as you can see, we can now actually specifically change its shape, its width, and height. I will cover this up in a bit more in detail. Back to the box, you can see we have these parameters, meaning we could by default just type in. And if we come to the modifier panel, you guys can see this. If I press this here, you can choose any AutoCAD ACI palette, or you can actually use the hex codes too. or we can use the 3ds Max palette. You guys can just choose this here, or you can just add a custom color by choosing the values. And once, for example, I need it to be this, like I'm just gonna choose this color over here, and I'm just gonna hit add color. You guys can Google too for the RGB values, the hue, saturation, and all of that. Anyways, once I hit add color, it's appeared here. I can just hit cross or cancel because our color is still here. When I choose it, you guys can see assign random colors mean each time I draw a shape, a new color would be assigned to it. I'm going to hit OK, and this would be applied to our material. Sorry, it's not a material, it's just a color basically. We will cover up materials too, so I can give this box any name. By default, we have two boxes. This is box 001, if I switch over to it without renaming it. So if I come over here, you guys will see it's called box 001. Okay, so it's box 001, it's box 002, but I erased the name. Let's say I'm going to give it a name of light color, or you guys can use LIGHT2. I'm just going to hit enter, it's light color now. And over here it's box 001. If I come here and I draw another box, and I go into its properties, you will see it's box 002. We will also learn how we can actually give names customly to each primitive. Another thing is the keyboard entry method to create something. I'm going to delete these. If you hold your left click and drag, you can do multiple selections like this. And if we come here, you guys can see in other viewports, they appear transparent. Basically, this is the wireframe mode. It shows you how many polygons or the topology each character has, or any of your objects, or how dense an area is, or which objects are there or here. So if I switched over to edge faces, you guys will see each item has this white little boundary. These boundaries, it determines how many polygons it has. For example, it has 6 sides, so it has about 12 polygons because it's being rendered on both sides. If you press 7, you guys can see the total polygons in our entire scene, and the FPS, basically the movement you're moving it, because we have to create animations and all. This is not the game FPS and how many FPS the software is running. It shows your animation speed on how many FPS your animation is running or so. Now we are going to actually create a sphere. As you can see, it has a bit of a different properties. We are actually dragging it from the center, and from the edges mean we are going to actually move it from the edge on which we created on and drag it. Like, these are different properties. Try it yourself and experiment around. Segments shows how many polygons it has. As you can see, as I take it down to a lower value, the polygons reduce. We will cover up what a polygon is. Basically, these squares you're seeing, they're polygons. Up here you can render and see your objects. If I hit render, you guys can see it being rendered. It is a ball shape, but not that soft. So to make something soft, you need more polygons. For example, this green ball, if I hit render, you guys can see it's being rendered, but it appears more smoother compared to this one. Meanwhile, a square needs hard edges. This is more of a rectangular, that's a complete cube. And basically this one right here, it's also rectangular, but a enlarged cube. So if I render them, you guys can see they appear okay. They appear perfectly okay because they need hard edges. Anyways, I was going to cover up and show you the keyboard entry method. I'm going to drag and select all of these and hit delete on my keyboard to remove them. They're completely removed. I'm going to go to box. You guys can see keyboard entry. Basically, we have here are the XYZ coordinates. So I'm going to just come here. 000 means this black center here. You guys can choose any position, anywhere, and you guys can pick up a length. For example, I need the length of 1 feet. Well, it's going to choose inch, so I'm just going to type in this little symbol which represents feet. Now you guys can see we have the length, width, and height of exactly 1 feet. And I want it to be created at least about a foot forward. Like, okay, it's an inch. I'm just going to increase it to a foot. A foot forward from here, meaning this x-axis. is going to appear somewhere around here from a foot from this. And when I hit a create button, it's going to create a perfect 1 feet cube right here. Okay, so along the X, it just appeared basically. So this is the front. I didn't really see it. This is the front. So along the X-axis, it basically has drawn it, as you can see. This is the center and the X-axis positive. So it has appeared here. If I type the negative value, you can go into negative too. So if I choose negative, negative, okay. So if I hit create, it's going to create it in the negative direction of the X-axis, like that. And negative from the center, it has been drawn right here. It's going to draw a cube, but you guys get the idea. Experiment with this a little bit. I'm going to delete this too. Now I will actually show you how you can navigate around something. So I'm just going to draw this cube here. We can select these, how to move these around. I'm going to hit W. You guys see we get this gizmo. Now if you want to move it specifically and accurately, you can come into any viewport like this front. You see it's only showing us X and Y because it's a 2D. Like this is a 2D viewport. So we can freely move it around. I need you to see. As I'm moving this around, it's going to move along only the X and Y, which in term of here is the height. But in the third dimension, when I switch here, it's going to actually show us the z-axis because this is third dimension. But this is the current viewport, so in all viewports it's going to adapt it. Because if you see here, if I choose this, it's showing the blue as z in here because this is the z in terms of this space. Because it's a 2D space, so its z would be right here, like the width in terms of this. Because even a sheet of paper, it has some thickness and height. So as I'm moving around, this is the viewport being moved. Don't confuse it with the object moving. You actually need to choose this arrow. When you have your cursor on any of the arrows, you can move that cursor only. If I have it on the the X, it's going to only move it. It was the 2D viewport basically. This is usually the Y, like this or this. So, and if I place my cursor right here on these two, it's going to move it in both X and Y freely. Similarly, if I come to the top viewport, I can move it forward and backward like this freely, because my cursor is placed here. You can also do it in a 3D plane, sorry, not 3D plane, the 3D mode, like this in the perspective as well as the orthographic. But since we don't really have that big of a model, if I switch to the orthographic, you can see like it's covering up a lot. Like let's say you have a lot of buildings or a whole city model. Orthographic is useful then to see it, but we're just going to switch to perspective. I press P, you guys can alternatively do here. Now the purpose of the edge faces, we're going to actually cover that up. If I go in here and, sorry, I didn't select it. Basically this will appear empty if you have none selected like this. So you have to select the primitive. You guys are seeing length, height, and width segments. I'm going to assign it a lighter color or a darker one like this blue so we can actually see the edges. One more thing, when we have something selected, this white boundary by default, it appears. So don't really confuse it with the edges. Basically, it's just a perfect box, one by one by one. As you can see, 12 polygons because each one of these is a polygon. A polygon can be triangular too. Don't confuse it by the mass polygon. Basically, these are raw polygon shapes. Like this, this cube is being formed by, well, two triangles. I will explain that in the next separate video what a polygon is. I'm going to increase it. You guys see this is actually going to be appeared as high poly as I'm increasing these. So it has a lot of these, but it's not going to make any changes in our model because if we render it, it appears like this. And if I just turn these back down to one by one by one, like I'm going to turn this one, and also the lens segments one. If when I render it, you see it still appears same, no difference at all in the shape. So you guys can use thousands of polygons like a game character nowadays. They use anywhere from between 20,000 up to 200,000 or 120,000 depending on the platform. So don't really worry about polygon count much, just make sure you not add way too much. Like we just need a cube, a 12, it's okay, like 12 are okay, we just need that much. You add some extra, that would be pointless and useless. Again, we are just going to basically create another primitive, and I'll show you how you could actually modify it and why the polygons are necessary. So you guys know these are the standard primitives. By default, we get the teapot too. It comes with it. We got the torus. You guys can choose these drags. You can choose the sides too. Like if I switch here, I just drew a torus. You guys can see it's going to smooth all the sides. And if I choose none, then basically the smooth modifiers actually show your whole model is smooth, but without the smooth, if I render, you guys can actually see those polygons hard edged. So we are going to cover up polygons in a different tutorial anyways. Now if you want to scale something larger or bigger, you guys can choose this symbol here, which is this one, and these are the ones: move, rotate, and the shortcut keys are Q for selection, this one select, and W is for movement, E is for rotation, and R is for the scaling. So if I press the E, as you guys can see, we can now rotate. The rotation works the same way, but we can see three angles here. Basically, this is going to rotate it along this way, which is the Z, but in terms of here, it's showing up the blue as the X and this as the Y. We also have the green, which we could rotate it, but since it's a 2D plane, we can't see much. Alternatively, if you want to see the mesh physically, you guys see it's this wireframe here. We can pick up realistic. It's going to show it as realistic as possible with shadows and all. Shaded, it's just going to show it shaded without any textures, but since we don't have any textures, it only shows you the base texture. It doesn't show you normal maps and other stuff. Edge faces show you how many polygons it has, all its structure. Like even you guys can see, if I reduce the segments, you guys see it now appears a lot low poly, and we get this, well, this octagon, well, no, it's actually a pentagon shape because it has lesser. So if we actually want to make it a tube, like a perfect tube, we would need to add more segments like this, so it actually appears like a tube or a torus. And you guys can just make the segments smooth, meaning it would still be hard, but you guys can see these segments are still hard like that, but only, well, the sides are not. So if I choose the sides only, you guys will see, and I render it, the sides will appear smoother, but you can see the segments hard. And all means is just going to appear like a donut, a smooth shaped donut, so be careful. Sometimes you need stuff to be hard, but it's looking smooth. So I will cover up in the next tutorial what polygons is and how you can start editing stuff, and I will explain modifiers to you. Again, if you press R, you can scale it down. Scaling is like stretching the object, like I just stretched it. It's now looking like a barrel, as you can see. And we could like edit it and make it more interesting, like a barrel or so. You guys just need to know which base primitive you need. Like now it's looking like a barrel because I just stretched it. But one more thing, you're actually stretching the shape. It's not being elongated or anything. Like, for example, if I do Control Z, Control Z is undo, okay, any action you do, but it's limited up to uh, 20 to 30 moves you can do. Like anything, even if I move it like this, even a little bit like this, these count. These actually count as a move, so be careful about that. In the newer versions, it might be 30 to 40. I could be wrong though. Anyways, now the next thing I wanted to show you, yeah. Basically, when we're enlarging it, this is like a natural length we're assigning it. This is different. We are actually elongating it. And what we are actually doing here by this, like we are just stretching these polygons. It's like the object is actually being physically stretched out. Again, in the 3D mode, we can just place it here. We are going to stretch it along the XZ. This is going to be the ZY, like you're actually stretching the polygons. So be careful about the scaling. Scaling something uniformly, yeah, it's going to enlarge it all equally. But if we do this, it's actually stretching the polygons. Like you can even see the gizmo, this blue symbol. You're seeing the blue, red, and green. You see, it's actually showing how we stretched it. This object is literally being stretched. Like in real life, you stretch something like elastic, it becomes a bit deformed. So we are deforming it by stretching it. But there are more modeling tips I'll show you where the stretching could be helpful. Anyways, like this is different. Like we stretched it to form like a barrel. Then we can texture it and we can move it up and down. You guys get the idea. Anyways, I hope this tutorial was useful for you to get started with 3ds Max. If you like the video, you can drop a like, and I know my videos suck a bit and I'm recently starting this all. but my newer tutorials, they would be a bit advanced and more helpful, and I'm going to actually show you how to make assets for video games professionally. So if you like the video, make sure to drop a like, or if you have any, you need any help or any questions, just comment them below.